Late night sleepy Matt here, but I just want to do one more reflection on an issue that arose in a counselling session this week that I was thinking about before. And in this situation, I won't give away much in terms of details, but the person I was speaking to was thinking about something they wanted and wanted to do, and the effect that might have on somebody else, the adverse effect it could have. So they were kind of stuck in a dilemma where they wanted something but were worried about whether it was the right thing to do in terms of how it would affect others. Common enough issue. Now it was interesting as we spoke that the conversation where we turned things around and upside down and looked at them, and the conversation started to break down into two main categories, two critical categories that helped us to think hopefully clearly, hopefully decently about the issue. So I just want to unpack those. The two categories were what I would call the objective and the subjective, and I'm using those words loosely. The objective, I use that word because it was about principles and about thinking at a more general level. So as we're unpacking things, I was asking questions that started to lead towards helping the client imagine if everybody was to behave this way, whether it would be okay or not. And so that was one way of getting in at the sort of issue and trying to think about it in a way that rose above selfish desire, to think in a clear-headed way. Rise above my own blind desire just for what I want, to think about more generally what it's reasonable and decent to do. So at that level, it was a bit like Kant, the moral philosopher Moral Kant's notion of universalizability. What if everybody was to act this way? There's a bunch of versions of this. So thinking about it at that level, and the issue passed the test. The desires passed that test, but it was an important level to think at. Then, still thinking at the objective level, we stepped out of Kant into what you might call the golden rule. And so this was continuing with a kind of imaginative exploration, because this issue wasn't just a philosophical, theoretical one, or just an abstract one. It was a human issue with human hearts involved. And so you really had to step in imaginatively to what was, to the meat and bones and flesh of this real issue, this lived issue. And so a second dimension of this objective level was what you could call the kind of golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto you. So I challenged the person to think about what if the shoe was on the other foot and it was them to whom this was being done, or they who would be affected adversely by this. Now it got complicated, and I won't go into details, but it still was clarifying for the person about what they were doing, and clarifying that actually it probably was kind of okay. Could have gone either way, and it would have been important just to be honest about that. So the person's desires passed the objective test, and it was good to sort of break it down and think about those levels. It was kind of the level of principle, so you get beyond the subjective selfish ego. The second category was the subjective, and it was at the subjective level that we were kind of trying to think about the individual involved as an individual, as a particular person. So whereas before at the objective level we're thinking about what it's reasonable generally to do, at the subjective level we're thinking about, okay, this person, how do things affect this person? Because they'll affect different people differently. And when you're making a flesh and blood, lived sort of decision, lived moral decision, as opposed to a theoretical one, you've got to think about the actual real individuals involved, their history, their emotional structure, and how it will actually affect them. That's real and important. It's not just that, well, people in general don't get affected, so what's your problem? No, we're dealing with real people here. So we thought about the issue across those two categories of the objective and the subjective, what's reasonable generally to do, and what it would be like if the shoe was on the other foot, and then also how it would affect this individual. And that enabled us to think through this very real challenging issue. So it's interesting how it breaks down into these categories, and how you do the exploration. It breaks down those categories, and in turn those categories help you to think more clearly. Okay, time for me to go to bed. Good night.